The moon of Viridra 9 was a lonely sphere, shrouded in perpetual twilight. Its sky was painted in hues of deep indigo and emerald green, illuminated by the swirling auroras that danced across the heavens like cosmic specters. This desolate moon was the private sanctuary of Arvok Zenthrex, a billionaire whose wealth was only matched by his reclusive nature. At the heart of this forsaken world stood his mansion, a towering, crystalline palace that seemed to drink in the moonlight and refract it into 1,000 colors. Yet despite the breathtaking beauty of his surroundings, Arvok felt nothing but emptiness. In the grand observatory of his mansion, Arvok stood alone, staring into the vastness of space through a glass dome that stretched above him. He was a tall, imposing figure draped in dark robes, his eyes a haunting shade of gold that seemed to flicker like embers in the dim light. His skin, a pale blue with a faint metallic sheen, marked him as a pure-blood Koran, one of the galaxy's most powerful and long-lived species. But power and immortality had done little to ease the burden he carried. It had been 10 years since the death of his only daughter, Erla, and in those years, Arvok's heart had turned to stone. He rarely left his estate, instead spending his days brooding in silence, surrounded by the lifeless hum of his robotic servants. The halls of his mansion were filled with relics and treasures from across the galaxy, yet to Arvok, they were nothing but hollow reminders of a life that no longer held meaning. Every evening, like a ritual, he would make his way to Erla's tomb. It was a magnificent structure, crafted from the finest black marble and adorned with intricate carvings that depicted the history of their people. The tomb was surrounded by fields of luminescent flowers, Erla's favorite, that glowed softly in the darkness, casting an ethereal light across the grave. Tonight was no different. As he descended the grand staircase, his footsteps echoed through the silent halls. A cold wind whipped through the open archways as he stepped outside, his cloak billowing behind him like a shadow. The air was crisp, and the distant sounds of Viridra 9's nocturnal creatures echoed faintly in the background. As Arvok approached the tomb, he felt the familiar ache in his chest, the dull pain that had never truly gone away. He placed a hand on the cold marble, tracing the engraved lines of his daughter's name with a tenderness that would have surprised anyone who knew the ruthless tycoon he had become. "Erla," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I failed you." But tonight, his solitary vigil was interrupted. As he lingered in the silence, his wrist communicator blinked to life, emitting a soft chime. Arvok frowned. His security systems were infallible, designed to keep the estate free of any intruders. He tapped the device, and a holographic feed appeared before him, projected in midair. A figure had appeared near the tomb. It was small, frail, and clearly not one of his robotic attendants. Arvok's golden eyes narrowed as he watched the grainy feed. The figure appeared to be human. "Impossible," he muttered. Humans were rarely seen in this sector, much less on a moon that was strictly off-limits. His estate was surrounded by automated defenses and cloaked from prying eyes. For a human to reach Viridra 9, much less his private sanctuary, was unthinkable. Intrigued and more than a little suspicious, Arvok ordered his drones to capture the trespasser. Within moments, sleek, spider-like machines, equipped with plasma-stun beams, scuttled out from hidden compartments in the ground and converged on the intruder. The security feed flickered as the drones closed in. The figure, a young girl, didn't resist. She merely looked up at the hovering machines with wide, glassy eyes before collapsing to the ground, unconscious. Her small frame was curled up at the base of Erla's tomb, her face pale and smeared with grime. The drone scanned her vitals and confirmed she was alive but weak, likely suffering from exhaustion and exposure. Arvok's curiosity was piqued. There was something strange about this human girl, something that tugged at the corners of his memory, like a forgotten dream. He gave the command to bring her to the estate's medical chamber. He needed answers. The girl lay unconscious on a floating medical bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of machines that scanned her vitals. Arvok stood in the shadows, his expression cold and unreadable as he watched the automated systems diagnose her condition. Her clothes were tattered and stained, clearly not suited for the harsh environment of Veridra 9. She was young, no more than 17, by human standards, with tangled chestnut hair and skin that was nearly translucent in its paleness. "Who are you?" Arvok muttered to himself. "And how did you get here?" The machines finished their scans, displaying the results on a hovering holoscreen. Malnourished, dehydrated, but otherwise uninjured. Arvok's eyes flicked to the readouts, noting with some surprise that her brain activity was unusually high, even for a human. There were strange energy fluctuations that his scanners couldn't fully decipher, something he hadn't seen before. Suddenly, the girl's eyes fluttered open. She gasped, sitting up abruptly as if waking from a nightmare. Her gaze darted around the room, panic evident in her bright, green eyes. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You are in my home," Arvok replied, stepping into the light. His towering figure cast a long shadow over her. The girl recoiled, fear flashing across her face. "Please. I didn't mean to trespass," she stammered. I don't even know how I got here." Arvok folded his arms, studying her closely. "I find that hard to believe, human. This moon is a fortress. You would have had to bypass multiple layers of security. Now, tell me, why were you sleeping on my daughter's tomb?" The girl's eyes widened in confusion. "Your daughter's tomb?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't remember. I was running, and then I don't know how I ended up here." Arvok's gaze remained fixed on her, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was bewilderment and fear. As much as he wanted to dismiss her story as a lie, there was something in her eyes, a sincerity that was impossible to fake. Against his better judgment, he decided not to throw her into one of the mansion's holding cells just yet. Instead, he would keep her under close observation. There was something about her that didn't add up, and Arvok Zenthrax had not become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy by ignoring his instincts. Turning to leave, he issued a command to his robotic attendants. "Ensure she is fed and rested. I will speak with her again in the morning." As he exited the room, the girl watched him go, confusion and fear still clouding her mind. She couldn't remember how she had ended up on this alien world, but one thing was certain: something was calling to her from deep within this mansion, something she could not yet understand. And in the depths of the tomb where Erla lay, a faint glow pulsed beneath the marble, unnoticed by anyone. A whisper in the darkness, like a heartbeat waiting to be awakened. Lyra awoke slowly, her mind sluggish, as if she were swimming up through layers of thick fog. The scent of unfamiliar spices and sterile air tickled her nose, and the soft hiss of machinery filled her ears. She struggled to open her eyes, the artificial light above her almost blinding. As her vision cleared, she realized she was lying on a soft bed in a sleek, futuristic room. The walls glowed with a dim blue light, and strange, floating screens hovered around her, displaying data in a language she couldn't understand. Her heart began to race. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was the chaos on her colony ship, the alarms blaring, the screams of the passengers, and the cold, crushing darkness of space as she had escaped in a life pod. But after that, it was all a blur. How had she ended up here, in this strange place? Before she could gather her thoughts, the door to the chamber slid open with a soft whisper, and a tall figure entered. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The being that stepped into the room was unlike any she had ever seen, a towering figure cloaked in dark robes, with piercing golden eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. His skin had an otherworldly, metallic sheen, and his presence seemed to fill the room with an almost palpable weight. He was beautiful in a terrifying, alien way. "You are awake," he said in a deep, resonant voice. It wasn't a question. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to run, but her body was still too weak to respond. She pushed herself up on her elbows, trying to muster some semblance of courage. Who are you? Where am I?" The figure's eyes narrowed, and he studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment before speaking. I am Arvok Zenthrex, the master of this estate. And you, human, are on Viridra 9, a moon that no one from your kind should be able to reach. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving her. Now tell me, how did you end up on my property, sleeping on my daughter's tomb? Lyra's eyes widened at his words. Your daughter's tomb? I don't know, she stammered. I don't remember how I got here. I was on a ship, and then everything went dark. Her voice wavered with confusion and fear. Please, I swear I don't know how I came to be here. Arvok's expression remained cold and unreadable, but his mind was racing. For a human to find their way to Viridra 9 was no small feat. His private moon was surrounded by security drones, cloaked shielding, and advanced surveillance systems that were virtually impenetrable. Yet somehow, this fragile, disoriented human girl had slipped through all his defenses. For a moment, he wondered if she was an assassin or a spy, but the fear in her eyes seemed too genuine. And then there was that other detail that nagged at him, the strange energy fluctuations that his sensors had detected near the tomb when she was there. It was a signature he hadn't seen since Erla had died. Your story makes little sense, Arvok said, his voice a low growl. But I will allow you to rest for now. Attempt to deceive me, and you will regret it. Lyra nodded frantically, her pulse pounding in her ears. The towering alien turned and left the room, the door sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. As the silence settled around her, Lyra felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. She lay back down on the bed, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this Arvok Zenthrex? And why did he care so much about a tomb? Elsewhere in the mansion, Arvok retreated to his study, a grand chamber filled with holographic books, alien artifacts, and the soft glow of various monitors displaying feeds from his estate's security systems. He watched the surveillance footage of Lyra's arrival for the 10th time, hoping to glean some clue as to how she had managed to get past his defenses. The girl had appeared out of nowhere, stumbling through the field of luminescent flowers that surrounded Erla's tomb. The surveillance drones had picked up strange readings when she touched the tomb, faint, but unmistakably similar to the energy signature of his daughter. It was as if, for a brief moment, Erla's essence had resonated with this human girl. Impossible, he thought, shaking his head. Erla was dead. There was no coming back from that, not even for the advanced Koran race. And yet, something about this humanless Lyra was triggering echoes in his long-dead daughter's tomb. He couldn't ignore the possibility that she was somehow connected to Erla's mysterious death, even if it seemed absurd. Arvok decided to consult the only other being he trusted, Professor Varix, an eccentric Koran scientist who had once been a close friend of his. Varix specialized in the study of consciousness, memory, and forbidden technologies that most Korans considered dangerous. If anyone could make sense of what was happening, it would be him. The girl's nightmares. While Arvok sought answers, Lyra found herself drifting into a restless sleep. As soon as her eyes closed, she was pulled into a vivid dream. She was standing in a dark, endless void, surrounded by whispering shadows. Ahead of her, she could see a figure, a young girl with flowing white hair, her eyes glowing faintly like twin stars. Lyra tried to call out, but no sound came from her lips. The girl turned slowly, her expression one of deep sadness. Help me, she whispered, her voice echoing in the darkness like a distant chime. I'm lost. So cold. Before Lyra could respond, the vision shattered, and she awoke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. The dream had felt so real, as if she had actually been standing in that void, speaking to that strange, glowing girl. Lyra tried to calm her racing heart, but a gnawing feeling lingered in the pit of her stomach. She had never seen that girl before, yet somehow she felt an odd sense of familiarity. It was as if a part of her knew this mysterious being, even if her conscious mind could not remember. Unbeknownst to Lyra, hidden sensors within her room had recorded everything. As she dreamed, the energy fluctuations in the estate intensified, causing the readings on Arvok's monitors to spike. Arvok watched the data in disbelief. Whatever link Lyra had to his daughter, it was growing stronger. A meeting with Varix. 2 days later, Professor Varix arrived at the mansion, his personal ship landing with a soft hum on the moonlit grounds. He was a wiry, eccentric Koran with wild silver hair and eyes that seemed to flicker with chaotic intelligence. Arvok greeted him with his usual stoic demeanor, but there was a hint of urgency in his voice as he explained the situation. "This human girl," Arvok said, showing Varix the data, "is linked to Erla somehow. She claims not to know how she arrived here, yet she has dreams that correspond with energy fluctuations near my daughter's tomb." Varix's eyes gleamed with interest. "Fascinating. If what you're saying is true, this could be a breakthrough in our understanding of consciousness transfer. Perhaps Erla's essence lingers." Arvok's face darkened. "I have no interest in wild theories, Varix. I want answers." Varix nodded, his excitement undimmed. "Leave the girl to me. I will run some tests, and perhaps we will find out what connection she truly has to your daughter." Arvok reluctantly agreed, but as Varix began his experiments, the nagging suspicion that he was venturing into dangerous territory only grew. Lyra's presence on Viridra 9 was no coincidence, and he feared that the answers he sought might unravel secrets that were better left buried. As the night fell over Viridra 9, a faint glow pulsed once more from Erla's tomb, the whispers growing louder in the silence of the moonlit night. Something was awakening, and it was far from over. The air in the mansion felt heavy, almost electric, as if the very atmosphere was charged with anticipation. It had been several days since Professor Varix arrived on Viridra 9, and the once quiet halls were now bustling with activity. Varix had brought his own team of assistants, as well as several crates of advanced scientific equipment. The mansion's lower levels, usually deserted, had been transformed into makeshift laboratories where Lyra was subjected to countless tests. Arvok Zenthrex watched it all unfold from his observatory, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the swirling auroras outside. Despite his misgivings about Varix's methods, Arvok was desperate for answers. The strange energy fluctuations had not ceased since Lyra's arrival, and each time they occurred, they seemed to grow stronger. More troubling still, Arvok could no longer dismiss the nagging feeling that his daughter, Erla, was somehow involved. Lyra's isolation in a sterile chamber deep within the mansion, Lyra sat on a cold metal examination table, her hands trembling. The past days had been a blur of invasive tests, strange machines that scanned her mind and body, and endless questions from Varix, whose probing eyes never seemed to blink. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and yet, she couldn't shake the sense that something profound was happening, something far beyond her comprehension. Each time they attached her to one of their devices, flashes of memories not her own would invade her mind. She would see visions of a girl with white hair, standing in a garden filled with the same luminescent flowers that surrounded the tomb. She could feel the girl's sorrow, her sense of longing, as if it were her own. And in those moments, Lyra could almost hear a voice, faint and distant, calling her name. Today was no different. Varix had hooked her up to another one of his strange contraptions, a helmet lined with blinking lights and cables that burrowed into her temples like invasive tendrils. The helmet hummed with energy, sending a sharp, tingling sensation through her skull. "Focus, Lyra," Varix commanded, his voice a mix of impatience and fascination. "Tell me what you see." Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the chaos in her mind. But the moment she closed her eyes, she was pulled into another vision. She was back in the void, surrounded by darkness. The girl with white hair was there, reaching out to her, her eyes filled with desperation. "Help me, please." "I'm trapped," the girl whispered, her voice like a fragile thread. Lyra gasped, wrenching the helmet off her head. She was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. "I keep seeing her," she stammered. "Your daughter. Erla. She's asking for help." Varex's eyes narrowed with interest. Interesting, he murmured, scribbling notes on his holopad. If your visions are truly connected to Erla, then perhaps. His voice trailed off as if he were on the brink of some great revelation. But Lyra had heard enough. She was tired of being treated like a lab rat. I don't know what you're trying to prove, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. But whatever connection I have to your daughter, I can't control it. Varex simply smiled, an unnervingly cold expression. Oh, but you will. We just need to push a little further. The hidden chamber late that night, Lyra lay in the small, sparsely furnished room she had been given. Sleep was elusive, her mind too crowded with images that did not belong to her. She kept hearing Erla's voice in her dreams, each time more urgent, more desperate. I have to know, Lyra whispered to herself, throwing the thin blanket off her legs. She had to find the tomb again, to see if she could unravel whatever connection she had with Erla. The mansion was quiet, the corridors dimly lit, as she slipped out of her room and made her way toward the underground levels. When she reached the tomb, the air seemed to hum around her. The marble floor was cold against her bare feet, and the soft glow of the luminescent flowers cast eerie shadows on the walls. Lyra approached the tomb, her heart pounding, as if it were guiding her. As she laid her hand on the cool marble surface, a surge of energy shot through her, and the floor beneath her feet trembled. She stumbled back, watching in awe as the stone beneath the tomb began to shift and crack, revealing a hidden passageway. It was as if the tomb itself had reacted to her touch. Taking a deep breath, Lyra descended the narrow staircase that had appeared, her way lit only by the faint blue glow of the walls. The air grew colder, more oppressive, as she ventured deeper underground. Finally, she reached a large, dimly lit chamber. At its center was something she had never expected, a cryogenic pod, its glass surface frosted over. Inside the pod was Erla. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The girl she had seen in her visions, the girl she had dreamed of, was real. Erla lay inside, her eyes closed, her face peaceful as if she were merely sleeping. The machinery around the pod pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow, as if it were keeping time with a heartbeat. Lyra's mind was reeling. How could this be possible? Erla was supposed to be dead. And yet, here she was, perfectly preserved. Before she could process what she was seeing, she reached out to touch the glass, driven by an instinct she could not explain. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, a shockwave of energy exploded from the pod, sending Lyra sprawling to the ground. The lights flickered, alarms blared, and the entire mansion seemed to shake. The betrayal. Arvok and Varex arrived moments later, their faces etched with disbelief. Arvok's eyes locked onto the cryogenic pod and then shifted to Lyra, who was still sprawled on the ground, dazed. "What have you done?" Arvok roared, his voice filled with fury and confusion. "How did you find this place?" I don't know," Lyra stammered, struggling to her feet. "I was drawn here. I felt her." Varex stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and madness. "Fascinating, isn't it?" he said, his voice almost reverent. "I had my suspicions, but I never imagined the link would be this powerful." "What are you talking about?" Arvok snapped, turning to Varex. "You said Erla was dead. What is she doing here, in stasis?" Varex's expression shifted, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "You misunderstand, Arvok. Your daughter was dying, yes, but I found a way to preserve her consciousness. I used forbidden Koran technology to link her mind with that of a human Lyra's." He gestured toward the dazed girl. "Erla's consciousness was too fragile to survive on its own, so I found a compatible vessel to sustain her." Arvok's eyes widened in horror. "You used my daughter as an experiment?" His hands clenched into fists, golden eyes blazing. "You betrayed me, Varex." But Varex was undeterred. "I did what I had to, Arvok. Erla's mind lives on, intertwined with Lyra's. They are two minds sharing one body, connected across space and time. The only way to fully revive Erla is to transfer the rest of her consciousness from Lyra into her original body. But it will mean the end of Lyra's existence. Before Arvok could respond, the cryogenic pod began to hiss, releasing a cloud of icy vapor. Erla's eyes fluttered open, glowing with an ethereal light. But there was something different about them now, a mixture of recognition and confusion. "Father." Erla's voice was soft, wavering. But when she looked at Lyra, her expression shifted, as if she were looking into a mirror. Lyra stared back, a flood of memories and emotions washing over her. She could feel Erla's presence inside her mind, not as a separate entity but as a part of herself. They were no longer two beings but one. And in that moment, the impossible had occurred. Erla and Lyra had become something new, something neither Koran nor human. Arvok, torn between the desire to embrace his daughter and the horror of what she had become, realized that there were no easy answers. He had lost his daughter once before, and now he was losing her again, to something far beyond his control. As the alarms continued to blare, the mansion shook with the force of something powerful stirring beneath it. A new consciousness was awakening, one that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The mansion's alarm screamed, red lights flashing in every corridor, casting ominous shadows that danced along the crystal walls. Arvok Zenthrax stood frozen, torn between disbelief and agony as he watched the impossible unfold before him. In the cold, sterile chamber beneath his daughter's tomb, his once-lost daughter Erla and the human girl Lyra now stood as one. The cryogenic pod hissed as it powered down, releasing a final gust of cold vapor. Erla, or rather the being that had emerged from her stasis, stepped forward. Her eyes no longer held the singular glow of the Koran race, but instead shimmered with an ever-shifting blend of green and gold. Lyra's humanity and Erla's essence fused into something neither fully alien nor human. "Father." Erla's voice was a strange, harmonic blend of her own gentle tone and Lyra's soft human inflection. "I am. We are. Here." Arvok's heart clenched. For 10 years, he had mourned the death of his daughter, believing she was lost forever. And now, standing before him was something that resembled Erla, yet was undeniably different. "Erla, is that really you?" he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in years. "Yes, and no," she responded, her gaze flickering with confusion. "I remember you, Father, but I also remember being Lyra. I am both, yet neither." She turned to look at Lyra's reflection in the glass of the deactivated cryopod, her eyes wide with wonder. "We share the same mind, the same heart." Arvok turned his furious gaze toward Varix. "You did this," he growled. "You twisted my daughter into this abomination." Varix merely smiled, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. "Abomination? No, Arvok, this is evolution. Your daughter was dying, her consciousness fragmenting. I found a way to save her by using the human's mind as a bridge. This new being is a miracle, a fusion of Koran and human, transcending both species. Can't you see the potential?" But Arvok was beyond reason. With a roar of rage, he lunged toward Varix, grabbing him by the throat and slamming him against the wall. "You had no right." Arvok bellowed, his golden eyes blazing with fury. "You used my daughter like an experiment. You turned her into this." Before Arvok could tighten his grip, the merged Erla Lyra intervened. She reached out, touching Arvok's arm with a gentleness that belied her strength. "Father, stop. I chose this," she said, her voice calm but filled with a strange authority. "We chose this." Arvok released Varix, who fell to the ground, gasping for air. The professor's smug expression faltered as he saw the look of resolve in the new being's eyes. This was no mere experiment anymore. She had become something far beyond his control. A dying moan suddenly, the ground trembled violently, and a deep rumble echoed through the underground chamber. The mansion's AI voice crackled through the speakers, its tone robotic but tinged with urgency. Warning, structural integrity compromised. Massive energy buildup detected beneath the surface. Evacuation recommended. Arvok turned toward the screens in the control room, where holographic displays showed seismic activity spiking all over Viridra 9. The strange energy fluctuations that had begun with Lyra's arrival were now reaching a critical point. It was as if the moon itself was waking from a long slumber. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with concern. "It's the energy nexus," Varix shouted over the rumble. "The experiments I conducted must have destabilized the moon's core. The merging of your consciousnesses has triggered a chain reaction. The entire moon is going to collapse if we don't shut it down." Arvok's mind raced. If the moon collapsed, it would not only destroy his estate but potentially create a rift in spacetime, unleashing chaos throughout the galaxy. His daughter had already been taken from him once. He would not lose her again, not like this. "We need to reach the core control chamber," Arvok commanded, regaining his composure. "It's the only way to stop the reaction." Without hesitation, Arvok, Lyra, and a reluctant Varix raced through the quaking corridors, dodging falling debris and sparks flying from the walls. The once majestic mansion was now a crumbling ruin, as if the very moon were tearing itself apart. The core chamber. The group reached the core control chamber, a vast, cavernous space filled with towering columns of glowing energy that pulsed with chaotic intensity. The central control console flickered, its screens cracked and covered in a fine layer of dust. Arvok quickly began to input commands, trying to stabilize the moon's core, but the system was unresponsive. "It's no use," Varix shouted, panic in his voice. "The system is locked down. The only way to stop the reaction is to release the energy manually, but it will require a living being to interface with the core." Arvok turned to Varix, his face twisted with rage. "This is your fault, you madman. You'll be the one to fix it." Varix backed away, his eyes wide with terror. "If I try to interface with the core, it will kill me. Only someone with a hybrid physiology, someone who can handle both Quran and human energy patterns, can survive the process." All eyes turned to Lyra. "I can do it," she said quietly, stepping forward with a calm that belied the chaos around them. "I can stabilize the core. I can feel the energy. It's calling to me." "No!" Arvok shouted, his voice breaking. "I just got you back. I won't let you sacrifice yourself." Lyra turned to him, her eyes soft but resolute. "Father, I am not just Erla anymore. I am also Lyra. And we both of us choose this. I can save us all." Arvok's heart shattered as he realized there was no other way. "Then let me help you," he said, tears streaming down his face. "We'll do it together." She nodded, a soft smile touching her lips, and together they approached the central core interface. Arvok placed his hands on the glowing console alongside hers, and a surge of energy enveloped them both. The pain was immediate and excruciating, as if their very souls were being torn apart, but Lyra's presence steadied him. "Focus on me, Father," she whispered. "We can do this together." As their combined energy flowed into the core, the entire chamber was bathed in blinding light. The chaotic readings on the screens began to stabilize, the tremors beneath their feet gradually ceasing. Arvok could feel Erla's warmth, her essence mingling with Lyra's humanity, and for a brief, fleeting moment, he was filled with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. But as the core finally stabilized, Arvok felt Lyra's grip weaken. The light surrounding them began to dim, and her form seemed to flicker like a dying star. "Erla. Lyra. Stay with me," Arvok pleaded, his voice choked with emotion. She looked at him with a bittersweet smile. "I'm sorry, Father, but our time is up. We were never meant to exist this way. Thank you for letting us be." And with that, the merged being of Erla and Lyra dissolved into pure light, leaving nothing behind but a soft, glowing residue that drifted through the air like stardust. Arvok fell to his knees, his heart breaking as he realized he had lost her all over again. Aftermath. The moon was saved. The core had stabilized, and the tremors ceased. But for Arvok, the victory felt hollow. He stood alone in the now silent core chamber, staring at the empty space where his daughter where Lyra Erla had been just moments ago. Varix approached him cautiously. "You've done the impossible, Arvok. You saved your moon, and perhaps the galaxy." But Arvok could not hear him. His eyes were fixed on the gentle glow that still lingered in the air, the last remnants of his daughter's spirit, mingled with that of the human girl who had given him hope. "They were more than a miracle, Varix," Arvok whispered, his voice hoarse. "They were my daughter, and they were Lyra. And I lost them both." As the glow finally faded into nothingness, Arvok turned away, his heart a cold, empty void. He had his moon, his wealth, and his power, but in the end, he realized, he had lost everything that truly mattered. And as he walked away, the faint echoes of Erla and Lyra's laughter seemed to linger in the air, a reminder that even in death, they had found a way to transcend the boundaries of life and become something truly eternal.